So we are now top of the hour. So I'd like to welcome all of you to today's University of Cape Town network discussion, our pesticide network. I am Professor Andrea Rother. I am head of the Environmental Health Division at the University of Cape Town. You are all most welcome. Please do continue to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, country, and organization. And for today's discussion, we have a great panel for looking at options for reducing risk when phasing out pesticides. If you're new to our pesticide network and our community of practice, it is supported by funding from Sweden through the Swedish chemicals agency CHEMI. I'm also assisted by Dr. Natasha Lalou, who's in the background giving technical and administrative support. And you can also use the WhatsApp group should you have technical issues. Again, please introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, country, and organization. It helps all of us to know who each other are. So the purpose of this community of practice on pesticides is really to bring together people from different sectors, which you can see on the screen. We are representing different organizations and sectors for a mutually supporting consortium to discuss issues related to pesticides. And today is an important issue on the risks linked to phasing out pesticides and how to manage and mitigate these. This community of practice is particularly interested in building the capacity of regulators, researchers, and NGOs in low and middle income countries, and to discuss emerging issues related to pesticides, such as phasing out. We hope to achieve this by learning from each other, sharing information, data, case studies, and problem solving. And I hope we will do quite a lot of that today. And really the goal is to reduce and prevent pesticide poisonings, chronic effects, and environmental contamination with a view to a toxic-free future for the next generation. This is not a webinar, so participants will not be raising their hands and speaking. We use the chat function. We really want to stimulate discussion. So use the chat link at the bottom of your screen for any comments you want to make on what you're hearing. And if you have particular questions in general or for the panelists, if you could please put it in the Q&A. If you click on the Q&A link at the bottom, you can put the name of the person who you'd like to answer the question or just leave it generally. This is a nonpartisan group, which means we respect all viewpoints. We may not agree with each other, but we do value the input of all. And do continue to introduce yourselves. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, next slide, thank you. As I mentioned, we have 3 speakers today, including myself. I have introduced myself as the head of the Environmental Health Division at the University of Cape Town. Then we will have Mr. David Kapandula, who's an independent consultant and senior advisor for Africa. For the Africa region. I have some background music. I'm not sure if you can hear that going by. And then we have Ms. Helena Casabona, who's a senior advisor for the Swedish Chemicals Agency. And Mr. Kapandula is from Zambia. My apologies, we have a lot of music driving by. I'm not sure if it's a political thing. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take you through question 1, and David's going to take you through question 2, and then Helena will take you through question 3. So basically, I'll give you a bit of a background, and then we will have time for us to discuss the question, and we'll have some polls, and we'll continue that with the other presenters as well. So why are we discussing this topic today? Why are pesticide phase-out periods an issue? And why is there a need for a guidance? Next slide. So for about 11 years, I was a WHO panel member and advisor on the FAO-WHO joint meeting on pesticide management. And one of the key tasks for this panel is to produce guidance documents that are linked to the International Code of Conduct. My apologies, there's a raucous party going outside on my window.
We can't hear any background noise,
Oh
fortunately.
my word, it is so loud.
We can't hear anything.
Oh, well, that's good, but it is disturbing me a bit. So if I'm hesitating anyway, it's definitely some political party going by. Thank you. And so part of what we do in this committee, which David used to also be a member of JMPM, and Helena is currently a member of JMPM, is to develop these guidance documents that link to the International Code of Conduct on Pesticide Management. So one of the things while I was a member, I realized was that countries are practicing a phase-out process. And so that means that when a regulatory decision has been made to phase out a pesticide, either it's an immediate withdrawal and means no use, no production, no distribution, or there's a time period that's given. And often in many countries, like South Africa, it can be 2 to 3 years. And there are issues that are linked to that. And that's why we found it very important to develop a guidance document. So we are hoping that this guidance document, it has been completed. It's just going through the final process. And we are going to refer to it quite a lot today. And we hope that by the end of the year, it will be published. There are really no current guidance documents specifically for low and middle income countries. If you want to get an idea of phase out options, you would have to really search and look for other countries. And this is what Helena is going to speak to, is some of the options that are available and what are the different risks and decisions one needs to make related to that. So some of the issues then are by having a phase out period or by doing immediate withdrawal will have certain implications. So obviously an immediate one would then create stockpiles, and there would need to be a process of requesting the industry to take back all the stockpiles, or the government finding funding to collect all the stockpiles and then have them destroyed. So often for that reason, there was this assumption that the best practice, or one of the best practices, was to create this sort of phased approach where you give a time period where the pesticide can continue to be used, what stocks currently exist, so there would be no importation or production allowed from the date of the phasing out beginning, but that the continued use could occur for a time period. And we're going to talk about these time periods. Some countries have 6 months, some have 18, some have 2 to 3 years. And again, you know, what the implications are for that. So the issue that struck me was that one is making a decision to continue the use in order to not have stockpiles, and the problems with having then potentially a large accumulation of obsolete pesticides. And that the decision then is, in many countries, will have an implication of continued human and environmental exposure, and sometimes to extremely hazardous pesticides, because the decision to phase out usually is based on the fact that it has severe implications for human health and the environment. And so one has to ask the kind of ethical question of, you know, the trade-off of not having stockpiles versus potentially having human health exposure and environmental exposures that can lead to long-term chronic effects. And that in order to prevent these kind of ethical issues, there needs to be a process of mitigating the risk. And some countries are practicing this and trying to do limiting human exposures, whereas other countries are not so much, and not communicating the potential risks to those that are exposed. Next slide, please. So just briefly, there are a lot of definitions in the guidance document that you'll have access to, and just, to sort of put these terms on the table, sort of what is a banned pesticide, and then so removing all the registered uses, cancellation of a product is the termination of a product, recall would be the manufacturer taking it back, withdrawal would be a cancellation of the product registration, and sometimes you have voluntary withdrawals, which Helena will refer to as well. And then I mentioned the phase-out period, where you've allowed a limited time use of stockpiles. Next slide, please. So I just want to show you the main categories of the guidance document and what it's going to be providing the users and hopefully government officials in low and middle income countries particularly, but not only. So looking at a strategy to ban or cancel a pesticide registration, looking at the legal frameworks, the risk to human health, stakeholder involvement, and also having this cost-benefit analysis. Very important is looking at the legal considerations, and David will highlight this as well, as how important it is that any type of phase-out process, banning or withdrawal, needs to be clearly illustrated in legislation, and that how important the details of the framework is, so you can see the key elements and good practices that would need to be there. And that there are different options, which I indicated Helena's going to take us through for making the decision of whether it's an immediate withdrawal or whether it's going to be a phase out, and how to minimize the risks. And then the guidance document also presents how to communicate the risks to the different stakeholders or individuals or target audiences that will be exposed. So how do you communicate to farm workers who are going to continue using these products, or maybe the general consumer who will be using it, or people who will be transporting the product, maybe by ship or by vehicle, and the various information that they need to have access to as to why a decision was made and how they can prevent the hazardous exposures, and how to finance this risk communication process. And then finally, to develop a risk reduction phase-out plan. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into this. There's lots of examples, and I had no specific reason for choosing Canada other than it was easy to find on the internet. And I just wanted to show the sort of process that they were putting in place for chlorpyrifos, and basically giving a year to use up existing stocks. I just wanted to point out where the red arrow is to say, how to use existing stocks to be exhausted in an orderly manner. And I'm hoping that the guidance document will allow the unpacking of what does the orderly manner mean? What does risk mitigation mean? What does a risk communication plan look like to really minimize the risks? And as I said in the beginning, it becomes an ethical issue to continue using stocks when you've made a decision to remove it from the market because of the severe health or environmental hazards it could cause. Next slide. So I just want to quickly wrap up some thoughts, and as I said, David and Helena will give you much more detail. So what's important is the length of the phase-out period, because which the decision triggers, because that will have implications of exposures. It's also important for governments to think about the types of pesticides that are being phased out. So should you have a phase-out period if it's a highly hazardous pesticide, or if it's linked to a high number of self-poisoning? And if you do have a phase-out period, what would be the maximum? It should be short. Having a legal framework, as I mentioned, is extremely important to make sure that the phase-out details are clearly illustrated, conducting a cost and benefit analysis, which includes hidden costs such as chronic health effects, and then having risk communication and risk mitigation. So I will now take us into the first question and hopefully have stimulated some questions for you. I don't see anything in the Q&A yet, but you are welcome to post something in the Q&A. So we would like to ask you, why should it be considered a good practice to allow a phase-out period of pesticides to be banned in order to prevent obsolete stockpiles at the cost of perhaps continued human and environmental exposure? So you're welcome to post your comments in the chat. And I see we have a question. So Pendile has asked, with regards to the immediate removal, are there countries that have taken this route? And did it not result in other issues like pest outbreaks, etc., in reaction to immediate stopping without a phase-in of alternatives? There's quite a lot of points there. I'm going to ask David or Helena if you want to come in and respond to this first before I say anything, because you both may have examples. You're welcome to turn your cameras on if you want. David or Helena, are you interested in responding to this question?
Thank you, Andrea. I kind of lost the question in the chat now. Could you please just refer to it once more?
It's in the Q&A.
It's in the Q&A. Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
So maybe David, do you want to go first? And then Helena, gives you time to read it.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Andrea. I hope you are able to see me.
Yes, and hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. So of course, I'll be able to discuss some of these examples in my presentation as I give it. But in terms of phasing out, we did carry out some phasing out, especially when we were dealing with the POPs, DDT in particular, so that we had obsolete stocks, but we also had stocks that we could not use, including waste as well. So we did carry out some form of disposal. It was not done in Zambia. We had to export some of it to some facilities in South Africa for incineration. But that was a concerted effort of the Ministry of Environment through ZEMA, as well as the Ministry of Health. And it included, I believe, when we were doing the contracts for the import of the DDT into Zambia, there was a clause which was put into the contract that the supplier had to take back the waste or any remainders that remained from the exercise. And so that clause helped a lot in terms of getting rid of the waste and taking it back for disposal. I hope I was able to answer.
Yeah, thanks. And I think, as you said, we'll come back to that. And Helena, before I bring you on, just to for the comment, I think it's important to understand that it's not like a day and night decision. Usually for countries, they're already long aware that it's causing a problem. We're already aware of many pesticides, for example, in South Africa that are causing problems. And so there's already an effort to look for alternatives. And usually by the time a phase-out decision or ban or immediate withdrawal has been made, alternatives are already in place. And the reason for an immediate withdrawal is because the impact, the health effects, the environmental effects are so severe that continued use shouldn't happen. John, I'll come to your question in a minute. Helena, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Andrea. Just a couple of examples from the Swedish Chemicals Agency. And I would say that sometimes when we do see a problem with the pesticide product, and if it's not really possible to phase it out or ban it immediately, we do have intensive stakeholder consultations to really make sure that we also are in the process of developing alternatives and also preparing both industry but also the users for what is, you know, about to come, the day when we decide maybe to ban the product or withdraw the registration completely. And sometimes, of course, we are also working with the restrictions of certain uses. So maybe we can allow a certain use for a certain time and then ban the other uses or withdraw those registrations. So, I mean, there are various ways, of course.
Yes, and I can see Zintila has made the comment, you know, a phase-out period could encourage the development of alternatives. So you don't necessarily perhaps have to have the phase-out period, but as what Helena was just saying, and I think David is going to speak to this as well, is that you can, you know, severely restrict the use as well. In some countries, you have to have a license to use the product in order to make sure that there is really very limited exposure. John, your question about when we talk about phase out, does it apply to all pesticides? Yes, it does. It doesn't necessarily, so, you know, trying to understand what you mean by all pesticides, but in other words, it's not, we're not just talking about highly hazardous pesticides, which is a particular category from the FAO-WHO joint meeting on pesticide management that has the 8 criteria. So it's not necessarily just those. It could be, you know, pesticides that are being used in a country quite a lot for self-harm, as was the case in Sri Lanka, where there was a decision made to remove and ban pesticides because of that, because they were being used for self-harm. I hope that answers your question. There is a poll on the screen. You are welcome to go ahead and respond to it. So is it a human rights violation to include a phase-out period when banning or withdrawing a pesticide from the market? And it'd be interesting to know why you think perhaps it's not a human rights violation. So you're welcome to comment to that in the chat. I'd be interested to hear your responses. Steve, I see you've posted a question. Do please keep posting the questions in Q&A. It's easier for us to find it than in the chat. So you ask why there's a phase-out approach. So the phase-out approach is, as I mentioned previously, there was an understanding that it was seen as a good practice because then you wouldn't have stockpiles. And then often it was a government that would sit with all these products now and have to find the means usually to export. In many low and middle income countries, you have to export it. However, it would be good to think more about at the registration stage. And if we think about the principle of cradle to grave or polluter pays principle, that at the registration stage of pesticides, that the regulator, the registrar, asks the industry how they will then dispose of products or take back and have a buyback scheme, should it be withdrawn or banned. Okay. So it's interesting, Lucienne's comment saying, I don't think the phase out is the violation, but the introduction into the market without any knowledge of the risks, which is another discussion in terms of the decision making to register a pesticide. You know, and one is assuming that countries have a very rigorous process. However, a lot of what the data that is used for registering a pesticide is limited at the time, or limited to the time when the registration happens. And so new data is being generated all the time. There's new epidemiological studies, there's new ecotoxicological studies all the time coming out. And so it could be that certain health effects were not necessarily flagged. Hence the importance of hazard assessments rather than risk assessments when registering a pesticide, because the hazard of the pesticide isn't going to change. Okay. Not quite sure if I understand. Petronilla, you say it's not a human rights violation because one is considering both sides, the health and safety of all humans, as well as the consideration of those who would have financially, legally imported the products into the up to the point. So I think my comment I was making earlier about the fact that new knowledge is gained. And so the question is, if a decision has been made that you're going to ban pesticides. So phase out is just a process to getting to the full removal from the market. You've had a regulatory decision for the full removal of the product. And yet, in order not to have stockpiles, a decision is made to allow exposure to continue. So yes, I'm aware in some high-income countries, when that decision is made and there's a phase out, there's quite a lot of effort put in place to have very, very little continued human exposure. However, that often is not the case in countries like South Africa and other low and middle income countries, where farm workers continue to use the product without protective equipment, where, you know, small-scale farmers continue to use the product and maybe clean the containers in river or store food in these products. And it's not a question about the behavior of the farmers or the farm workers. The issue is at a higher level that we need to think about actually removing the risk as quickly as possible. I'm sorry if I'm not getting to all your questions because I'm not used to facilitating and presenting at the same time. So I will try and get to yours. So we do have another poll. In which situations do you feel that there should be no phase out period? So I'm seeing highly hazardous pesticides when the health of people are most at risk. Well, that depends on how the product is going to continue to be used. Where there are alternatives. When the phase out is so the manufacturer is not going to lose money. Yeah, I'm not sure about the trade-off between health and continued making money. So that is something that one has to take into account. And as I say, there's usually an indication. A good indication is if you look at products that have already been banned in other countries. So for example, if we in low and middle income countries look at the products that have already been banned in high income countries, many are still being continued and exported to low and middle income countries. But they're banned for a reason. Even with the Rotterdam Convention with prior informed consent, you can look at the risk assessments that have been submitted as to why those are being listed, that prior informed consent has to be given before there's an export approval that is provided by the country that's importing. Or you can look at the risk assessments done by, for example, the EU or other countries to see what the risks are associated with it. Right, I see I'm missing a whole lot of questions. So from Guy, also industry applies pressure to the politicians and encourages the farmers to continue using the product to generate profits. Okay, I think that's more of a comment. And there are cases of banning and unbanning due to pressure from industry. Yes, we have seen that as well. So we are coming to an end to this question. I just want to see if there's any more comments or questions. So Stephen, let me see if I can see your question. Once the pesticide is phased out in the main country where the ban has been imposed, it simply gets shipped and sold into other countries and continue to cause harm. So my understanding, and David can speak to this, but my understanding is that when a phase out has been, so when a pesticide has been determined that it is going to be phased out, that there's no importation or exportation allowed, or production, it's just the use. using it up within country. But perhaps, David, you can clarify if that's the case. That is not the case in high-income countries where production is continued. So if a pesticide is banned in some high-income countries, the pesticide cannot be used in that country, but it can continue to be produced for export. All right. Well, thank you very much for all your comments, and I will continue to respond to some of them in the chat. In the meantime, I'm going to hand over to David. So David Kapandula, who I mentioned, was an independent consultant from Zambia. And also, it's really important in the guidance document, there will be case studies. But I think the case study that David's going to share with us now is very important. So David, over to you, and thanks for giving of your time today. David, are you...
good afternoon, good evening. Are you able to get me?
You've just frozen a bit, but yes, we can get you now. If you need to, you can turn your video off.
Hello, Andrea, you get me?
I can hear you, David. Can you hear us? So, David, you may want to turn your video off. Okay, I think we have lost David. I wonder, are you back with us, David? Is it just me, Natasha?
Yeah, his sound seems to be coming in and out. I'll just check up on him and see what's going on.
Hello, Andrea, are you able to get me?
I can hear you now. Can you hear us, David?
Yeah, but the network is not too good. It's breaking.
Okay. Well, you might want to turn your,
All right.
I'm not sure if you've turned your video off. Oh, we've now lost him completely. I wonder, Helena, if you would be comfortable with starting, we move to question 3, and then in the meantime, Natasha, if you can see if you can help David with a better connection.
Yeah, that's fine, Andrea. We can move ahead and then come back to David.
Okay.
So I might leave my video off as well, if that's okay. Can turn
Okay,
it on later.
I see David is just trying again. Let me just check. David, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Oh, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go back to question 2 and we'll hand over to you. And thanks again.
My sincere apologies for that.
No problem. It happens. Are you able to see the slides?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So as introduced by Andrea, my name is David Kapindula. I'm currently an independent consultant, but I also advise the African region on the MEAs, especially those to do with chemicals and waste. And I'm a former registrar of chemicals at ZEMA here in Zambia. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'll give you a perspective of the work that we've done here in Zambia, and I'm going to start my presentation with legal and institutional framework that govern the management of chemicals in Zambia, including pesticides. So we have the Zambia Environmental Management Agency, the institution which I used to work for, which is a statutory body under the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment. And the Environmental Management Act, number 12 of 2011, then established ZEMA. So ZEMA is the principal environmental regulatory body, which with a mandate to implement and enforce provisions of the Environmental Management Act, number 12 of 2011, which includes pesticides. So chemicals management is dealt with under Part 4 Division 5 of the Environmental Management Act, number 12 of 2011, of course, with the sister or the SI 112 of 2013 being the statutory instrument, which also focuses on sound management of chemicals. And then the management of chemicals in Zambia, which includes pesticides, is based on the life cycle approach. And so as we see on the right there. Next slide, please. Yeah, so to start with, I think it's important for us to get to know some principles that are in the Act that govern environmental management, which are also applicable to pesticides management. So Section 6 of the Environmental Management Act, if you look at C there, there's the precautionary principle. And I got this definition from Olsen and Motegemi, 2014. It says, if a product, an action, or a policy has a suspected risk of causing harm to the public or to the environment, protective action should be supported before there is complete scientific proof of a risk. And then the other principle that I would like us to refer to is the polluter pays principle. I think Andrea referred to that, which is the commonly accepted practice that those who produce pollution should bear the cost of managing it to prevent damage to human health or to the environment. And that is covered under the Rio Declaration of 1992. The other key principle, which I thought I should highlight, is the one which says that the citizens shall have access to environmental information to enable citizens make informed personal choices, which encourages improved performance by industry and the government. And we had Andrea mentioned some of these aspects of risk communication and so on. And so these three key principles, I think, are relevant to the discussions that we're going to have below. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's look at some of the provisions that are in the Act with regard to banning, restricting, or severely restricting a pesticide. Now, Regulation 40, which is in the SI 112, says the minister may, on the advice of the agency, severely restrict, or restrict the use of production, the use or production of a pesticide or toxic substance, where the minister determines that the unregulated use or production of the pesticide or toxic substance is or is likely to be harmful to human health, animal or plant life, or the environment. Then the second part says the agency shall publish a list of the banned, restricted, and severely restricted pesticides and toxic substances in a daily newspaper of general circulation in Zambia within 7 days of the ban or restriction. So we have I think it's important for us to understand here the aspect of the minister is the one who actually issues the ban, or who can severely restrict or restrict based on the advice from the agency. And below you are going to see some steps on how that happens. In Regulation 74 states also as follows that Part B says a person who fails or neglects to withdraw from sale or any other use a pesticide or toxic substance within 6 months of the state of its ban or restriction, and then C says exports a pesticide or toxic substance which is banned, restricted, or severely restricted without the approach or the approval of the agency, or in contravention of the terms and conditions of the ban or restriction contravenes a provision of these regulations, and below there's a fine. Okay, so it's liable upon conviction to a fine not exceeding 200,000 penalty units, which is equivalent to about 80,000 kwacha. If you convert that in dollars, about $3,000 approximately, somewhere there. So we see here the crafters of the law put in a clause that if a ban, of course, from the previous question, we saw the fact that some people were asking or making comments on whether a ban should be immediate or should be transitional. I think the crafters of this law had in mind a situation whereby you have banned the pesticide and you give a period of within about 6 months to make sure that you communicate the decision to the producer to withdraw the product, and that should at least take place within a space of 6 months. Yeah, so so within Zambia, I'm told South Africa is about 2 to 3 years, but here in Zambia, this is the current situation that's prevailing. However, there are cases whereby a ban can be issued depending on the severity of the product that is in question. And that can be an immediate ban, meaning it has to be an immediate withdrawal. So the situations really differ. Next slide, please. So, so the process followed by the regulator. So what usually happens is you have the regulator receives reports of a pesticide causing harm to human health and the environment. And then, of course, you have to carry out investigations to see what is really, what's causing harm to how the pesticide is causing harm. So you do some kind of an investigation, and then you come up with a preliminary report. And then again, after you come up with your report, then you have to undertake some form of consultations with the various stakeholders, affected and interested stakeholders, such as, of course, the general public that are being affected, the industry who are the owners of the product, various government agencies, departments, and research institutions, and then, of course, the NGO community as well. So it's important to do that consultation, and that is one of the principles that I was referring to, that the public has to be consulted in every decision that the agency or the minister makes. And then once that consultation has taken place, and then the agency then makes recommendations to the minister. So this recommendation can be either to ban a pesticide, and that ban can be an immediate ban, or it can be a transitional, as we saw in the regulation in that article in that clause there, or to restrict, meaning you can have a product either restricted for certain use if it was, for example, packed in smaller packs for off-the-counter use. You only pack it in bigger packs for the use of only people who are trained to use it and in only certain conditions, or severely restrict it, as we see below, as I'll explain one of the examples. And then once that decision that recommendation has been made to the minister, and the minister has issued either a ban or restriction or to severely restrict the pesticide, then there has to be a communication back to industry and of course the other stakeholders as well. And the law provides for a publishing of a banned or restricted or severely restricted pesticide. So you have to publish that list or that particular product in a daily newspaper of general circulation in Zambia within 7 days of the ban or the restriction. So that's a provision that is there in the law. So the agency is mandated to inform the public on what the decision that the minister has undertaken. Next slide, please. Okay, so let me just give you some examples. So there's a product in Zambia called it used to be it's called chlordane. I think all of us know chlordane. It's a persistent organic pollutant. It was one of the first 12 dirty dozens, but in Zambia that product was banned because when we discovered that it was a POP, and then there was a ban that was issued, and it was used in Zambia as a termicide. So many parts of Zambia infested by termites. So you cannot just construct a house without treating the foundations. It means then you're going to have termites going all the way up to the roof. So this product was very effective to stay. You treat your foundations with it to stay for many years, and that's why it was a POP. Yeah. So we issued a ban, and I remember prosecuting one gentleman whom we found still trading in this product. I think we had two or so cases that we prosecuted because they were not able to adhere to the ban on the chlordane. Then the second one is that's an example of a ban. So this ban, of course, we followed the same process as I highlighted before. And then the second aspect is severely restricted. One product that was severely restricted in Zambia is a DDT. So DDT was Zambia applied for an exemption to use DDT for IRS, indoor residue spraying for malaria vector control. And there was only one entity that was allowed to do this and to use it, and that's the Ministry of Health. And so there was a restriction there. So the Ministry of Health applied to the agency for the license to import it. And when it came under strict conditions. The quantities, so there was a notice of arrival to the agency on when the product was going to arrive and what quantities the ministry was going to import. And when it arrived at the border, it was escorted from the border to the warehouse where it was stored. And during the distribution of the product to be used in the affected districts, the agency was informed and records were kept. And this product was, like I said, it was not used to be used anywhere else in agriculture or anywhere else, but it was only used for IRS. And we have a current candidate that is causing some problems. And at the time when I was leaving the agency, and I believe this is still happening now, is a product called diclovos, commonly abbreviated as DDVP. And this product is being used quite a lot in Zambia now for self-harm. Some people were using it to poison others, but the frequent cases that we have now are for self-harm. And before I left the agency, there was a process that was put in place to see how this product can actually either be banned or severely restricted. So there was a consultative process that was happening in the agency. And so I believe if there are my colleagues from the agency on the forum, they can be able to provide some information. So I think that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. It was really important to see all the detail that you gave and shared with us in relation to especially the legislation that Zambia has around a phase out. I'm not sure if the penalty is a deterrent in terms of the amount. Maybe in Zambian kwacha it is. But I really think the detail has to be in the legislation of, when a product can be phased out and for how long. And also the reason why the guidance document has been developed by the FAO and WHO joint meeting on pesticide management. So we open it up now to you. If you could give us examples of legal provisions in your own country, or perhaps the country that you work in, when a decision is made to ban a pesticide, including a phase-out period or not. Any detail that you have would be good if you could share it. I see that Gift has said in Nigeria, a phase-out period is usually included. It would be good to know how long the phase-out period is. Is it one standard phase-out period, or are there different phase-out periods depending on the product and the use? There's a question from Kansani, I think for you, David, regarding DDT. What measures are there to ensure operator safety? And then he says in South Africa, DDT operators are employed on a temporary basis, especially when there is an outbreak during hot and rainy seasons. David, would you like to respond?
Yes. So like I said, DDT is one severely restricted product, and it was only brought in by the Ministry of Health and to be used only in districts that had that needed to use it. So the process of deploying, first of all, importing DDT, I've explained that it's quite strict. The agency is involved, or the inspectors are involved. And at the point now, before you use all the applicators, the people that are using the application of the DDT are actually trained. They go through rigorous training, and the agency is involved in that training. The agency is usually called upon that we are conducting this training. So the agency also goes to explain what the law says, so that no one is found wanting. And then issues of the use of PPE and all those are actually checked by the agency before any person begins to apply the DDT. So there's the what called pre-inspections. Before the application actually happens, the agency goes to inspect. And during the campaign, the application campaign of the DDT in the various districts, the agency is also part to make sure that they act like auditors to ensure that things are being done correctly. And then post-spray, that is also important. The agency is involved. You have to go out and make sure that there were no residues remaining, or the empty containers are properly stored and in a good place, and so on. So all those aspects are part of the program that is employed in the use of DDT.
Thanks, David. And thank you to those of you who are taking the time either to post a comment in the chat or a question in the Q&A, or on the poll. If you want to respond to this poll question, what role should the industry play to reduce risks when a pesticide is banned? The link is in the chat, and you can just click on that. And if you can't find it, you can always go to menti.com and put the code in that you can see at the top of the screen. David, would you like to respond to any of the comments that you can see for the poll question? David, I think you're muted if you want to respond.
Hello, Andrea?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, you're saying are there questions for me?
Can you see the poll on the screen? There are comments that are being posted in response to what role the industry should play. I wondered if you want to say anything in regard to those.
Okay. Yeah, so the role of the industry, like I presented in the in my presentation, there's a principle there, the polluter pays principle. But I also know that industry has what they call the stewardship program. So industry has got a role to ensure that if the pesticide either it has expired or it has been withdrawn from the market for any reason, they have a role to play to take it back and have it disposed. But the industry can also play a role in ensuring the safety that certain information is passed on to the consumer. For example, there's need to when an industry is selling a pesticide to any community, there's need for information in the form of data sheets and labels and so on, clear information. So to make sure that the users understand how the pesticide is to be used. Yeah, but in terms of ensuring that there's a take back of the product after it's no longer wanted for use, the industry has got a role because of some of those principles that are highlighted in the law in Zambia. And so that's the practice that we've been following in Zambia.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a lot of comments coming through in terms of the role of the industry. And I think it's really important to highlight, as I said during my presentation, that needs to be in legislation. What is the role of the industry when a pesticide is banned? And David referred to the polluter pays. There's also the cradle to grave principle. And it really needs to be at the time of when a pesticide is registered that the registrar requires a plan from the industry as to what will happen in terms of if a pesticide is banned with immediate withdrawal or a phase-out period. David, did you want to come in again?
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm using a very small screen, so help me read some
No,
of the
there's.
comments.
I will. Natasha, maybe if you can just scroll back to the top of the poll. I'll just see if there's anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I think really one of the main reasons why countries, or probably the main reason why countries are allowing for a phase-out period is so not to have stockpiles. Stockpiles is a huge problem for low and middle income countries. However, the point that I raised in the beginning is it an ethical issue or a human rights issue that we are allowing a product that has been earmarked to be removed because of the severe hazards of it to be continued to be used for a time period? And are we mitigating those risks? And should the product be allowed? So I think it's not a blanket decision. I think it's a decision based on the hazard of the product, for example.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, Andrea. Like you've said, when some of us started this work, one of the practices that we're told is that when you want to phase out the product, one of the best way to phase out the product is actually to use it. But then one begins to refer to the question that you've asked. Is it a human rights issue? Is it okay to use a pesticide which has already been banned for phase out, or do we, keep it and then accumulate stocks? But of course, it goes back to the role of the industry. If you have strong legislation which requires or which mandates the industry to ensure that when a pesticide is banned or it's phased out, then the law has to be very explicit as to when the phase out has to happen or when the industry should actually take out that product out of the market. And according to the Zambian law, really it is the polluter who pays for all the costs of disposal. So if the product is found to be wanting, then the industry should remove it from the market and have it destroyed. And I think, of course, there was also a reference, I think, in the previous comment or question where someone was saying, you know, a company can move a product that is banned here and take it to another country. I think that's where now some of these conventions, like the Rotterdam Convention, come in, kick in. So you cannot just move a product across borders unless one is doing it illegally. But if one is doing it legally, then it has to be with the consent of the other designated national authority in another country to make sure that they're not moving it from one country and dumping it in another country. Hello, Andrea, can you hear me?
Sorry,
I think you're muted.
I'm talking away. It's my turn to be muted. Sorry. I was saying we're running out of time, but just one quick comment that that you've just stimulated is something that we haven't spoken about is the use of levies, for example. So when, you know, financial reasons or financial incentives. So often I mentioned that when a pesticide isn't just banned out of the blue. There's an indication from often from a quite long period of time that there are problems with the pesticide, either from other countries who've already banned it, or there's, you know, poisoning incidences within the country that have been occurring for a while. And so one of the strategies that governments can use is to put a levy every year on that pesticide before they get to a banning phase and increase the levy so that that money then can actually be used to help with the stockpiles so that there are no stockpiles. But to think about using economic mechanisms, levies and fees to help manage and not just put the product on the market, let it be continued used and let health effects continue. Would you like to make any final comments or statements from what you've seen before we move on to the last question?
Yeah, I think what you make reference to is very important. I mean, the comment that you made when I said you know, if someone is found wanting, they get a fine of $3,000. That is nothing really. Okay. Yeah, and many African countries actually are going through that process where there's competition really between development, whether they should increase their fees for registration of pesticides or they should attract, because I think that is the competition that's going on now. When you want to increase your fees in order for you to recover the cost of the work that you're actually doing as a regulator, on the other hand, you are being told do not increase your fees so much, otherwise you're not going to attract investment. So in the end, really, from my practice, anyway, when I was at the agency, I found that most of the time government ended up subsidizing the costs of actually of regulating pesticides, which I think is not okay, and which is not the practice in developed countries, because in developed countries, I've got instruments that are able to recover all the costs for registration, for the licensing and enforcement of the entire regulatory regime. So I think we probably need to look at that. Yeah,
you're right. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for that very important concluding comment. Helena, we're going to move on to you. So we've had a lot of talk about the need for risk mitigation and risk communication, and we've talked about this guidance document. So I'm going to hand over to you, and in the interest of time, for you to take us through some of the detail. Over to you, Helena.
Thank you so much, Andrea. So we're moving on to question 3, and I'll just give you a brief background. So we will talk about risk communication and risk mitigation measures during phase out of a pesticide. And as Andrea said in her introduction, my name is Helena Casabona, and I work as a strategic advisor at the Swedish Chemicals Agency. I'm mainly involved in pesticide-related activities. I'm also currently a member of the JMPM. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this table is actually included in the guidance document that we are discussing today, and it's based on a table developed by the Pesticide Regulatory Agency in the UK. So we have used that as a basis for the development of the table in the guidance document. And the table displays a proposal for different phase-out periods, depending on the 3 different types of withdrawal that we have included. The first one is actually for products which pose a high risk to human health or the environment, or where you have seen severe efficacy concerns, for instance. And for these products, an immediate withdrawal could be considered if it's possible. The second one is for products posing high risk or for which there are efficacy concerns, but where there is actually a problem to have an immediate ban when it's not possible, for instance, for various reasons. And for these products, a phased withdrawal within 18 months is proposed in this table. So that is just to moderate this a bit and give industry and the users some time to have, to phase it out. And the third one is for product registrations withdrawn for administrative purposes. I mean, there could also be a voluntary withdrawal that has been initiated by the registration holder. And for these products, a phased withdrawal within 48 months could be applied. So as you can see in the table, the phase-out periods are divided between import, sale, and distribution of products, and for storage, disposal, and use. And they differ, as I said, depending on the type of withdrawal. And the last 2 columns describe different issues that need to be considered depending on the selected option. And there are also areas of special attention, such as the need for adequate capacity to implement and enforce the decisions. This is very important, I think. And also the risk of stockpiles, as we have discussed today. And there is also a need for risk communication and temporary risk mitigation measures that you need to apply during the phase-out period. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So regarding the risk communication during phase-out, one purpose of risk communication during the entire phase-out period of a pesticide is, of course, to provide those who will be exposed with some information. I mean, they need to have accurate and accessible information about the pesticide hazards. And of course, this needs to be in a relevant language and according to literacy levels. There is also a need for accurate and accessible information about the pesticides' short and long-term health risks, and detailed and accurate information on risk reduction procedures and different means to implement these. Next slide, please. So then you can develop a risk communication plan, and this is also included in the guidance document more in detail, but I've just tried to cover, this in brief. So you can divide your risk communication plan into 6 different steps. So the first step is to identify the risk communication plan developer who will lead in developing the plan. Is it the government? Is it a consultant or somebody else? In step 2, you define the risk communication plan goal. I mean, you have to know what the reasons are for the pesticide being phased out and really be able to describe this. In step 3, you identify the target audiences, who needs to be informed. I mean, which people are affected the most. Maybe you need to inform first responders, poison centers, etc. And in step 4, you plan and design the risk messages. So what messages need to be communicated? And this might need to be tailored for specific audiences as well. But you need to talk about short or long-term risks, for instance, how you can actually minimize exposure, and also inform about less toxic alternatives if they are available. In step 5, you inform the target audiences about the risks, and then you need to come back to the channels that you will use to communicate the risk messages. And I think we heard that David, he was mentioning the newspaper in Zambia that is being used for communication, but there might be other channels as well. I mean, we usually in Sweden use our webpage for a lot of information. And then in step 6, you need to explore what resources exist to finance the development of the risk communication plan. Okay, the next slide, please. Yeah, and so we will talk also a little bit about the risk reduction phase-out plan. And also here we have divided the plan into 5 different aspects, you could say, to consider. First, you have to look at the phase-out strategy, and I think we have spoken about that. We heard a lot from Zambia what they have implemented. So you need to develop relevant policies for more efficient phase-out practices and implement a framework and regulations that could actually also support the use of IPM or IBM. You could also include the conducting of research on substitute substances or practices and implement international conventions and agreements. And then you have the legal aspects. So you need to set rules and procedures for efficient approval of lower risk pesticides as alternatives, and also establish legal periods or timelines for phasing out. And then maybe there is also a need to regulate the manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, and retailers, so only approved pesticides are supplied to the user. In terms of risk reduction activities, that could be a promotion of IPM in agriculture and IVM for public health or other pest control approaches, and the conducting of trainings in safe use and voluntary information campaigns. You can also establish risk reduction programs and encourage industry stewardship for the life cycle of the product. We already spoke about risk communication activities, so you could develop your risk communication plan, and that should be developed or in place immediately after the decision to phase out a pesticide. So, I mean, you already have it available. And then you can share risk and benefit information to enable people to make informed judgments about the use of regulated products. And then at the end, important is, of course, financing. And so you should explore possible funding sources from donors or industry that may support these phase-out activities. So I think that was my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I mean, you've gone through a lot of very important information, and the detail will be in the guidance document. I think what's important to think about is when should a risk communication plan be developed? And perhaps you want to just comment on that while we encourage everyone to respond to the question 3, what mitigation, risk mitigation, risk communication measures are currently in place in your country? Helena, back to you.
Yeah, I would say that I think certain things can be done on a more generic basis. I mean, of course, you will have a specific case for your specific pesticide that is going to be phased out, but I assume that certain things can be explored beforehand. So you could have a strategy, you could have your plan, and once you need to inform certain groups of people in society or users, you have the information available. So just to work ahead, I would say. And then you can just refine it once it's needs to be used for a specific phase out of a product.
And do you know in Sweden if when a pesticide is registered, if companies have to submit any type of plans? Either what will happen if the product is banned. Are there any specific things that are included in the registration process?
Not really, I would say. It's not requirement for them to submit any kind of plan. I mean, it's very much a discussion between the Swedish Chemicals Agency and the applicant. And then, of course, if there is a need for information, we will certainly inform about if there are any certain problems that need to be highlighted. We can also use our webpage for that. And then I assume that, I mean, I don't always know exactly what the channels are for industry to share the information further.
Thanks for that. So we now have a poll for you. What's your opinion about the phase-out table that was presented? Do you have any comments or thoughts or questions? And do you think this is something that will be useful for you to use in guiding your legislation? And while you respond to that, David, I don't know if you want to speak a bit more about the risk, any kind of risk communication plans that Zambia uses or has in place?
Well, we don't have a written risk communication plan per se, but what the agency has in place is a communication strategy overall for the agency. And it also has in place a unit that is mandated with communication issues, education.
Oh, we've lost you.
Maybe I can just add that we have a communication unit as well that support, I mean, the person, I mean, the registrars.
Communication. So there's a space, any form of communication. Can you get me?
Yes, you broke up for a while. Carry on.
Okay, sorry. Yes. So so communication of risks, also methods and channels, and then the groups that should be reached out. All that is stated in the communication strategy that the agency has developed, or in the overall communication strategy that the agency has developed. And so there's some form of communication strategy for the overall, for the agency, and then there's also a unit that is mandated to actually communicate all issues that are dealing with that are dealt with by the agency.
Thank you for that. Thanks, both of you. I see Gift has posted that one of the risk mitigation strategies in Nigeria is creating awareness that the pesticide is being banned through news articles and radio announcements. Well, I think that's very progressive. In South Africa, we're currently in the process of banning chlorpyrifos, or it has been banned. And there, I have not seen any notification anywhere other than the official letter that was posted on the internet. And chlorpyrifos is a very widely used product, and I would imagine that many people who have access to it aren't aware of that. Helena, do you want to comment on any of the postings you see on the poll?
Yeah, maybe. There is one post that says the table takes a very structured approach. It would be useful if all countries could put this into their legislation so that phase-out periods are handled equally. And I think that handling equally is a good point, not just between countries, but also when you're dealing with applicants, because you would like to have a fair treatment of everyone. So I think that was a good point.
Thanks for that. Maybe we can move on to the next poll. There are some comments in the chat. I'll just see. So there's a comment from Pendile about IPM and legislation are some of the risk mitigation measures in place in South Africa. The materials safety data sheets is one of the risk communication. I don't know if you want to talk about the materials, well, the safety data sheets and who actually has access to them as a risk communication tool. Helena, do you want to respond to that?
I mean, the safety data sheets, of course, they're available for professional users of the product. So there is certain information included in that one. It's very specific. It's not so, I mean, it's not always that it reaches other people that might be exposed to the pesticide, of course. So that is something to consider, but it's part of the communication for sure. So that's correct.
Andrea?
Yes, please go ahead, David.
Yeah, there's just a comment by Perrine from Zambia that the Zambia Environmental Management Agency has an environmental communication strategy, like I said, but she also goes further to say that further under projects for management of chemicals and waste, there are specific communication strategies that are specific to the projects. Project strategies that are specific to projects and the chemicals of concern. So I think just to add on to what I said earlier.
Thank you. Yeah, and often environment is perhaps a bit more ahead than sort of the health communications, but I would imagine that with ZEMA, it should be both, hopefully. Helena, do you want to comment at all on the current poll? Give some examples of risk communication measures used in your country. There you are.
Yeah, let's see. Mandatory 3-year education for farmers where risk mitigation is taught. Yeah, that is, I think that sounds very, very important. Do you actually have a 3-year education for farmers? Including risk mitigation measures. Regulatory text should take these issues into account. Yeah, and that is of course also possible. And while we're talking, maybe I can just mention this because I think it's very important when we talk about especially harmful pesticides. I think when you design your legislation, I mean, just to include a very clear decision-making criteria, because that will also help countries, I think, in their handling of applications and not, you know, authorizing or approving pesticides that don't that are harmful. I mean, because I think if you just talk about very general criteria in your legislation, it might be difficult to actually know what you mean. And I think we need to be very transparent. So that is one way of avoiding, you know, actually having these products on the market in the first place. But so that is working upstreams, so to say. Okay, see, and there are more comments coming in here.
And there's a question in the Q&A for you.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if, and I think maybe while you read the one in the Q&A, I'll just make a comment about Shumurai's comment about HHPs. I think it is really important to bring in the fact that many countries are developing a highly hazardous pesticide strategy for identifying them and removing them from the market. And I think that process as well will help reduce having the need for these long phase-out periods. I don't know, David or Helena, if you want to comment on that. Or Helena, do you want to go to Steve's question?
Yeah, I'm reading Steve's question right now. Yeah, it's a matter of how to reach people, right, with very complex messages sometimes. That is a challenge, and that is why it's important also that the agencies or the regulatory authorities do what they can to avoid having these products on the market, because we know how difficult it is to actually communicate to some of the users what the problems are and actually really teach people how to protect themselves. So there is, of course, a balance. So maybe, David, would you like to jump in?
On the risk communication, or
if there was anything else in the on the slide. Let's see, what do we have here?
Maybe I can just jump in while you're thinking, David.
Okay.
That I think one of the things that's really important to think about with risk communication is that we often think about, you know, needing to communicate just to maybe the farmers and the end users, but we also need to communicate to the policymakers, the decision makers, who may not understand about the toxicity and what does it mean if it's carcinogenic, mutagenic, or reproductive toxin. So there is a need for communicating the risks also to those who are making the decision, and perhaps making the decision to sometimes have these long phase-out periods. And so I think it's important, including making it palatable, as Steve says, for others as well as even the retailers or the extension officers.
Mm. Mm.
David, did you want to? Otherwise, I think we have one. Do you want to comment any more on this poll? And otherwise, we'll go on to our next one.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I mean, risk communication, especially in the age that we are in now, is very critical. I mean, there are various means. I know when I I gave my presentation, the current law talks about publishing in the newspaper, but now there are many other means of communicating the risk to the public. Of course, the traditional ones, you have safety data sheets, you have the labels. Of course, you can do awareness through radio and television. Now there's the use of the internet, but I think the critical group really the users, the small scale farmers on the ground. How do you ensure that we communicate effectively with them? I mean, we've all talked about the use of PPE by farmers when it's really hot. You know, it's October now in this part of the world, October, November, September, October, November, and the farmer is spraying their crop. And how do you ensure that they use the PPE and so on? So that aspect is very, very critical on how you actually communicate to the farmer so that they can actually, you know, be able to ensure that they protect themselves and eventually their families as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. We are slowly running out of time, and I see we have one last poll. If you feel that we've left anything out in terms of risk mitigation, you can just post it on the poll. I think also Chitra made an important point about, you know, the pesticide industry and the role of the pesticide industry. And I think given what David was just saying in terms of information, you know, going to the farmers, when we talk about risk communication, we have to make sure that it's balanced in terms of who is communicating the information. Is it coming from the government, who doesn't have a vested interest in the profit or sale of the product, or is it just coming from the industry, who would like to continue perhaps selling their product? So we need to also make sure that risk communication is quite neutral and really has, you know, protecting the health of the farmer and the farm workers in mind. Helena, would you like to make any last comments before we start wrapping up?
No, I think you said it very well. I mean, we need to look at different stakeholders' responsibility in this case to see how we can all work together to reach out with the messages.
Yeah, and there's also, you know, what elements of risk mitigation maybe weren't included, presented on the screen. I mean, the disposal aspect is not something that's included in the guidance document, because the guidance document is focusing on really on the reducing the risks of during the phase out period. And so do you want to comment on that, Helena, about the use of pesticides during when they've expired during disposal?
As you said, you know, we haven't really, I mean, of course, the disposal problem is, there is always a problem. And that is why, I mean, you have to be, I mean, when you're considering a phase out, in order not to develop stockpiles, that is why we also need to look at the different phase out periods and maybe work with flexible approaches when possible, or at least see what we can do in terms of restrictions of certain uses and so on, as David mentioned as well.
Great. So I think that's a nice point to end on, because we've come to the end of our time. This has been a very important discussion, and we really appreciate, first of all, the presenters. So thank you very much to David and Helena for taking their time and sharing their experience with us. And also just to remind you to please sign up for the network. It is being posted in the chat for you. You will then receive the link to the presentation, as well as the digest summary summarizing what we've discussed. Also, you will get notifications of the next discussions that are coming up. Also, I'd like to thank Natasha and Maxine, who were in the background, making this a very smooth running presentation and session. Also, I just want to say, if you sign up, we will circulate the guidance document as soon as it comes out. So either join our WhatsApp group or sign up through email, and you will receive a copy then of the guidance document as soon as it's been published by FAO and WHO. Please do take a moment to fill in the evaluation. Do we have a next slide? In terms of, we do have, I think this is our last pesticide discussion of the year. However, we do have a chemicals network discussion. If you are interested in that, you can also reach out and email us. We do have 2 more discussions coming up, and one will be on risk communication. So perhaps you will be interested in that. Otherwise, we wish you all the best for the rest of your day, and thank you very much for engaging with this important topic. Bye for now. Have a good day, nice evening, or a good start to your day.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.